So let's get started. Thank you so much. So this is the third episode. The podcast is called Samvāda. This is the third episode, and so thank you so much, Ankit Bhuptani. It's a pleasure having you on the podcast. And so you've been TEDx speaker. You've been a member of the United Nations Civil Society, and you have addressed the UNHRC as well as the Security Council, right? As well as you've been an LGBT rights activist, also the founder of the Queer Hindu Alliance, who strongly believes in the India story, right, for the global good. So this is a great opportunity for me to actually interact with you and discuss a lot of things that are right now happening in the world, as well as India. Like, suddenly India is like taking a big role in the global stage. So thank you for joining. So your thoughts as to, like, how has your speaking experience been? So tell us what you do in your daily job, sort of.
Hi, Sam. So it's so good to be here with you. We got connected through, I think, Clubhouse app.
Absolutely.
During the pandemic, when we all were locked down at home, and this new app appeared from like a magic to connect with different set of audiences discussing diverse set of topics. And that is where we met. So I'm glad that happened. Not the pandemic part, but connection part.
Yeah.
So what I do many things, and sometimes I wonder, how do I put that into just in a LinkedIn bio or an introduction text. Primarily I am working for inclusion. If I have to express my work in one word, that would be inclusion. But this inclusion is different. It's of a different kind. Generally, when you hear the word inclusion, that leads to the actor who does the work of inclusion are called as activist. And when you hear the word activism, the very first set of an identity or image which comes to our mind is somebody who is shouting on the street with banner and sloganing against somebody who is oppressor. Right. And I feel that can be one way of inclusion, but in that you're creating an activism of hate. And I somehow do not find myself comfortable in the conversation of activism, which is creating more hate towards each other, saying that, and which sees the world in binary, which is saying that somebody's oppressor and somebody's oppressed. Wherein I want to be a kind of an activist, which is using the language of care and love, which is using the language of accommodation. And that leads to an inclusion. Right? So I do not see somebody's oppressor and I do not see somebody's oppressed. It is a situational thing. It is a contextual thing, which keeps changing. And this core philosophy, which I practice, is a gift from my belief in my own way of living, which is of Sanatana Dharma, which does not look at the world from binary perspective, which does not say that there are heroes and the villains, and villains will be always a villain and a hero will always be a hero, right? Which always gives you fluidity, which always makes you keep questioning the moment you arrive at a judgment, and will tell you, hey, is this the judgment, right? So what I do primarily is a work of inclusion. And there are various tools by which I do this work of inclusion. One, I'm an LGBT right activist, as I explained earlier, what activism means for me, wherein I try to make societies, especially the Indian society, in Indian context, make people understand that what it means to be queer, what it means to be LGBT, and it is not a Western influence. I use the Indian language, I use the Indian context, I use the tools which Indian people will be able to connect with. And give out the message of inclusion. I do work of inclusion with my professional work, wherein I work for an educational non-profit organization, wherein we teach lesser privileged children in urban slum communities across India, wherein we are doing the work of inclusion, of including expanding the quality education to the people who are not getting it. I do work of inclusion in my work within the United Nations and other multinational forums, wherein I talk about the voices which are not being heard. I talk about civil society communities. I talk about the global South countries. I push for more asset allocation, fund allocation for the causes which deserves but do not get the funding properly. I do the work of inclusion of India's story within the global context, and I'm very passionate about it. Wherein how do we make Indian voice heard? And in my experience so far, the Indian civil society voice within the UN system is so minimal that sometimes I feel that why a country of such a huge population, fifth largest economy, 5 trillion economy to be in few years, do not have active civil society voices within the multinational forum, including United Nations. So I try to facilitate that conversation. I try to get Indian youth to participate in various events, forums, give them the speaking opportunity and things like that. So big answer to your simple question. What I do the work of inclusion in whichever best way possible.
When you do big things, they do take quite some time to elaborate. And I'm really glad you are working in areas. One, it's very difficult to also get a foot in these kind of doors, right? So to get into such places where you have at least a handle. I know that you said India is the story is still happening, and these the things that you do, work on request for funding, not a lot actually happens, the outcomes. But then it is itself a great achievement that people like you are there, are making the right noises and speaking and holding that the flag of India there, representing us, right? So I actually want to know, you did explain, what is it that you do, but then in the interest of someone who might be listening and who might be interested to get into such roles, what would be the path, for someone to be or get where you are, right? So to get into sort of again, so is activist the right word even in these in these spaces? Or is it more like a consultant? Is it more like a diplomat sort of a work, or is activist the right word to use the term?
To describe me or within the UN system? What is your question?
Within the UN system? Within the
UN system, activism is not very popular word, but civil society is the popular word.
Okay.
And let me break a myth on your podcast today.
Okay.
Most Indians have this myth that getting into UN system as an individual citizen who has no connection with the diplomats, who has no connection with the political leadership of a country, cannot get into UN system. Wow. Let me break that myth completely. Getting into a UN system is as easy as walking into a Starbucks and ordering your cappuccino.
Wow.
All right. How do we do it? And that is what my work is, wherein I keep talking about Indian voices and enabling Indian voices to go to the UN and speak and get engaged. And it's not just about speaking, but also a lot of backdoor diplomacy, making India's story shine. And also the causes you believe in shine. It not necessarily be India, right? It can be the cause you feel, which is happening in some other country. Like I feel so connected to the voices of Bangladeshi Hindus. I feel connected towards the global Hindu phobia rising around the world, including in Western universities. So I'm happy to be the voice of that as well, in whichever capacity I can be. So how do we do it? So let's understand the UN system, okay? Technically, there are 3 set of people, and I'm going in very simple language for people to understand. Because if 10 years ago, somebody would have explained me in this language, I would have understood it much better than the way I was introduced to the UN system, right? So I'm putting that down. In Gujarati, we say that shira ni jem, like a shira, a good shira. You put it in the mouth and you just fall through your system. You do not need to do a process on it. So I'm putting that in that language. So there are 3 set of people within the UN system. The very first is the diplomats, right? If you want to go that path, amazing. You are the official spokesperson of your country. You are representing your country. You need to go through the civil service, give the exams, pass the interviews, and blah, 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 blah process. You already know. And after that, if your country, the political leadership or the ministry's leadership will think you're suited to be placed in the UN, they may put you in the UN role, and then it is fluid, right? So one set of people are the diplomats of respective countries. The second set of people are the UN employees themselves, right? A UN has many organs. Each organ has multiple offices and posts and independent experts appointed by these offices. So you can apply for any of these posts. There are so many scams website out there, so be mindful of it. The UN career has their own dedicated page. You can go there, apply. There are so many jobs which are completely remote working. You don't need to be in New York or in Geneva to working for the UN. You can apply for this role, right? So second set of people are the UN employees. The third set of people are the civil society people like me. UN has given agency to common citizen through the civil society route to participate in the UN discussions, UN engagements, UN decision-making process. All right. And you can go there. So there are two ways to do it. One, if you are an NGO, registered NGO in India, you are have all your financials in place, and you're doing your paperwork perfectly fine. You can apply for the UN membership as an NGO very easily, and that is the very easy process to go through. It takes around 1.5 years to 2 years once you apply to be accredited by the UN. But it's not a very difficult thing to do. You just have to apply, answer a few questions. You would be checked on your credentials, and if they find everything okay, most probably you will be admitted. And
so it's largely paperwork, like a formal paperwork that has to go
formal
through.
Paperwork is what they require.
Right.
But I, in my experience of engaging with the UN in last 8 to 10 years, especially in past 8 years, I've not seen a single application which has been rejected, which I know of.
Ah, nice.
All right. So it's very easy. The second part is that if you're an individual not connected to any NGO, right? How do you go to the UN or be engaged with the UN? So there you go to the UN website and check which are the civil society organization in your country. All of the civil society organization gets the invitation of various UN events, conferences, and things like that. You can associate with them, you can volunteer with them and be part of it. Like I started my UN activism journey by being part of some global network which already had the accreditation of UN, and I still continue to do that based on that. So it's very easy. Last time I checked, there are around 44,000 Indian NGOs registered with the UN. All of them are getting around 7 passes to go to Geneva every year for the Human Rights Council, to go to attend the New York General Assembly. But how many of them are being utilized? I don't think so any. Right? Okay. So that is one thing, to travel as a tourist to New York or to Geneva and stand outside the UN building and click a picture because you will not be allowed inside. But there's another thing to get into that building and experience the real thing happening. That's very easy. If you have more questions on it, anybody listening to this can definitely reach out to me. I can direct you towards those.
Definitely. I mean, those things will be definitely helpful. But we can also take these, people can also take this offline. I think at the end of the show, we'll leave your contact details so people can reach out to you, whether on LinkedIn or Twitter. So I mean, this is the whole getting into the UN, right? So now, but the end of the day, UN, as an organization itself, the approval ratings of the organization and sort of the role that the United Nations is playing in the world, how is it, where does it factor in right now with the current geopolitical situation, right? The multiple attempts of reforming the UN have failed. Their approval ratings have been on a decline, not just in India but around the world. Do you, what is the future of the UN? Is there considering the kind of global political situation that we are in, what's the do we even need a UN? Does there have to be a refurbished a body, or countries like India, and there has been talk about India and Brazil to we brought them on to the Security Council. So what is like the makeup, or like, how does it move forward?
I'm a great believer of United Nations with all its shortcomings. Look what UN is doing, and what UN is able to deliver is beyond what you see, what is happening in Security Council
Right.
and in General Assembly. I have to admit here that within the whole UN system of its multi-organ forums, only the Security Council is with some kind of a teeth. All other are just a lion without a teeth. All right, so it doesn't have any powers as such, except the Security Council and little bit General Assembly, which needs the reform and all that. We can talk about that in a minute. But look, UN today is able to deliver food to millions and billions of people around the world. All right, over 12 countries in the Africa are not having absolute political social crisis because UN peacekeeping missions are active in these regions. Half of the underserved population of the world are able to get vaccinations. And I'm not just talking about COVID. Vaccination has been a buzzword since COVID. But remember, vaccination is a humanity need even before COVID for many other diseases.
There's polio, there's
is
malaria,
able to deliver that because of United Nations. Right? Today we have something called as Global Charter of Human Rights is because of the United Nations. Today, I'll give you an example. All right, let me give you an example. 4 to 5 years ago, there is this organization called Trivon in Bangladesh. All right, and they are an LGBT organization. Were publishing an LGBT-centric magazine. Some religious fundamentalist of a particular faith attacked their office, and it reached to a point wherein their life was under danger, immediate danger. I get a call at around 11:30 in night of what is happening. I immediately call other friends and activists within India. What can be done? We approached various diplomats whom we can access at that point of time. Many of the countries, including few of the immediate neighbors of Bangladesh, did not agree to assist at that time. But one particular Western country, I'll not name them because of the security reason, but one particular Western country, after a lot of push, they agreed, and they said, okay, look, if they can somehow reach to our embassy, we can give them immediate asylum within the embassy.
Okay.
Right. And we said, okay, give us half an hour, 40 minutes, we will get back to you. We reached out to this activist who were really under life threat in their office. I had nowhere to go. They said, hey, that's wonderful. But look, I step out of my office, I'll be immediately murdered. There is no way that I can reach to the embassy. Then we had to again go back to the same country and say that, hey, can you do something else in this case? Now, if an embassy car travels with its flag, it is also considered as extension of the embassy. Okay. So, extension of the country.
Right.
Right? With that risk taking, of course, they cannot officially send a embassy vehicle, but somebody from the embassy went to their office with bare minimum embassy security personnel with them, rescued them out, and traveled, got them, gave a safe passage to them within the embassy. And within 12 hours, they were on the UN humanitarian role for asylum, and then they were given the asylum in respective country which hosted them.
Okay.
This example I'm giving is because I was personally involved in it. But there are so many such examples out there. During the Afghanistan crisis, all of our phones were constantly ringing day and night. I remember I was in Rajasthan with my family at Nathadwara. It was in month of August, 18, 19 and 20. These 3 days, were terrible. Right? When people were calling us somehow that, we know you have some connections, or somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who can get us safe evacuation from our country. Somebody will say that, don't save me, but
they were calling you from Afghanistan, or were there families or somebody were calling you outside?
There were direct few calls from Afghanistan. There were calls of the friends of the friends of the friends of the friends,
right.
And then things like that. I still remember this one particular call I received. She was mother, and she said that I have a 10-year-old daughter. I don't want her to live here. Her life will be really ruined. Right. It doesn't matter what happens to me and my husband, but if my daughter can be evacuated, right? I mean, these kind of calls, and whatever we could, we did. Many of them are in Germany currently, in France, in UK, and in the US.
Yeah. I hope as well as in India, quite a few of them.
Yes. We primarily given access of our country asylum to primarily from the minority religion community. Lots of Hindus, Sikhs, and other minority religion were able to come to India, and they are in India currently. So look, UN has failed terribly on its core commitment and principle that the let war not happen in the world ever.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And with Russia, Ukraine war which is happening. I hear your frustration. I hear your frustration wherein UN was founded in a time where there were only 51 countries part of it. Currently, there are 194, but yet its mechanism, its structure, its forming are still stuck of its founding days, and it does not reflect the living reality of today. All of that needs to be changed, reflected. But let me end by saying one thing. And then, in one fine day, in the Garden of Eden, Adam asked Eve, after observing Eve for a few days, that he thought that she's no more interested in him. One day he finds the courage, and Adam asks Eve that, hey Eve, is there anyone else in your life? That's the story. That today, with all its criticism, let's say UN does not exist. Then my question is there anybody else?
Yeah. Who else will fill those shoes? I think, they do. So as you pointed out, there are so many other humanitarian roles that are, and the divisions of the United Nations, which actually go in and do great work in several countries where these social systems infrastructure is not present, and then they kind of go in and fill those roles, whether it be child protection, as well as human rights, as well as the health with WHO and other organizations. But coming back to probably just a couple of steps back, in terms of India, right? We have a big representation in the United Nations. How is India looked at? What is the current image of India in the United Nations? And you have been working in that space, right? So what is going on there? How is India's image taken? What was it 10 years ago, and what is it now? What do the diplomats that you speak to regularly consider about India as on today? And is it going to change? If it has not changed?
I see a lot of difference within the diplomat circle or within the UN, the way they look at India in past few years.
So it has changed, you're saying?
Absolutely, which is changed for good.
Oh, nice.
Earlier, the India image was primarily, you hear the word India, they will think of chai, they will think of yoga, they will think of Taj Mahal, and that is it. And then a country with so many people, cows on the streets, honking
snake charmers.
Exactly. So all of those typical Indian things. But what we see today in a conversation is that the India which is able to project its image, which has completely transformed. Today, you name a sector in which India would be on a table. Let's give an example of another multilateral forum, which is International Court of Justice. Right? India, just 10 years ago, in 2012, would have not even imagined to fight that context, right? To fight that election. Forget about having its own judge.
Right.
ये हमसे नहीं हो पाएगा. People say that, okay, there are things I can do and there are things I cannot do. India's having its own judge at International Court of Justice was things India cannot do, especially for India's then political leadership and then the bureaucrat, because bureaucracy is, remember, the reflection of the political leadership.
Right.
So that was out of the box. Our ambassador then to UN, and a wonderful person, one of the finest foreign service diplomat we have produced, Syed sir, right? Who was there at the UN Security Council during the abdication of 370 happened in 2019. He has written this book, and I would highly recommend all of the people who are interested in international relations and diplomacy from Indian perspective to read this book called India versus UK. And in that, he describes that Prime Minister in his starting days was traveling, and as we all know that PM Modi traveled to over 40 countries
in the first year, right?
In the first year of his, taking oath of office.
It was also subject to quite a bit of memes and viral content that this region doesn't stay in the country. Yeah,
that's the beauty of democracy. So I'm not saying that that should not happen, and that's part of democracy. It's fun for that to happen. That's perfectly fine, right? But also, like in Indian prime ministers not being criticized as much as the US presidents are criticized by their own people and their media and the meme makers. And so that's fine. We can have that discussions for some other time. But there is this one difference, and I don't know if you agree. The US president's criticism is not coming out of hate. It's just fun. It's just mimicry. Wherein the anti-Modi conversations in Indian social media context is not coming out of mimicry or comedy, but it is coming out of sheer hate for him.
Wasn't it also the case? I mean, I kind of partly agree with you, because wasn't it also the case with Donald Trump? Because there was quite a bit of vitriol.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There was more of a political opposition, which kind of was morphed in the guise of comedy.
True. Yeah, Donald Trump have had that share, but then remember, Donald Trump experienced that only for 4 years. PM Modi has been experiencing this since 2002. Right,
that's true.
So coming back, so one of the travel, he traveled to one of the stans, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and all that stans, the Middle Asia. In that, he spoke to one of the president out of nowhere. See, it was not in the prime minister's briefing. It was not in the agenda of the discussion. But when he spoke, when he met the respective president of this country, and a candid conversation, PM Modi asked, if we put our judge to this election, will you vote for us? And this country's president said, hey, yes, why not? There are hardly any representation from Asia at the International Court of Justice. Mostly it's the white old men. I mean, that's my paraphrasing it. Sits there. And if India puts its own judge, amazing, we will vote for you.
Nice.
PM comes back from that meeting and then puts this task to Ministry of External Affairs that, hey, look, reach out to all the capitals in the world and then see what feedback comes back from it. Now, fast forwarding that story, we got most of the people agreeing to it, some opposing to it, some neutral. Then we discovered that the person against whom we are going to run is a judge from the UK. So it's going to be a direct fight between India and UK.
India and the UK, yeah.
And it's almost like a Netflix episode. So what happens here is that tomorrow is the election, And today evening, India gets a call from Boris Johnson, then Foreign Secretary of UK.
Okay.
The call is answered by then Foreign Secretary of India, Dr. Jaishankar. Is addressed, and he requests that I want to speak to the Ministry of Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj.
Sushma Swaraj, yeah.
Jaishankar puts a hold to it. Says, let me check if Minister is awake. It's almost past 11 p.m. in India. Calls Sushma ji and says, I don't know for what he's calling, but tomorrow is the voting. And if he requests you to pull back your judge from the competition, will you be in a position to say clear no? And when a request comes from such a high level on person to person, sometimes keeping in mind your global and larger interest in mind, you may have to lose some things, smaller things, right?
Yeah.
So probably India would have had to back down if Boris Johnson would have requested that. Okay. So Sushma ji asked Jaishankar ji, what would you suggest? Jaishankar ji says that, let me handle this case.
Okay.
Okay, then Sushma ji says, okay, I trust you, you handle it. He goes back and informs Boris Johnson that Sushma ji is asleep. Is there anything urgent need that she needs to be waked up? Or else can I give you a call back tomorrow morning? Get your call her back tomorrow morning. Boris Johnson agrees, says, okay, no problem, nothing urgent, we can speak later.
Okay.
Next day morning, the election happens. India wins. And we had a judge on International Court of Justice, and how it helped India in the case of Kulbhushan Jadhav.
Kulbhushan Jadhav, yeah.
Right? You see how linkings happen.
Yes.
So even nobody knows why Boris Johnson called that night. It was just that Diwali is coming and I'm expecting a sweets from you, or please pull down your candidature.
Wait, is this episode narrated in Dr. Akbaruddin's book?
Yeah. Dr. Akbaruddin's book. India versus UK. Please do check it out. I may have paraphrased a little bit here, but please do check that up. Yeah. So coming back, how India is looked upon, looked at. It has completely changed. Today, India is on a table which matters. You talk about renewable energy. India started Solar Alliance, right? Just 2 days ago, there was a global meet of it in India.
Right.
You talk about defense. India is today hosting a defense expo in Ahmedabad. You talk about global health. India started the Global Center for Traditional Medicines. Head of WHO was recently in India. Right. Currently, United Nations General Secretary is in India. He is in Mumbai today. And tomorrow he would be traveling to Gujarat for some events. Right. So you name the global challenge, and India is on a table. And not only India is on a table, India is giving a positive contribution towards it.
Yes.
And that is what has changed. पहले क्या था ना कि हम, what is bare minimum for me, that was 35 marks wala exam.
Engineering terms mein, yeah.
And now we are saying that how can I get an A+ grade? And in my A+ grade, it's not just India's interest, but it is the global South interest. It is the interest of tiny, tiny countries which matters, whose voices are not being heard. India becomes the voice of that. And that has changed. You see any global crisis, India would be top few countries to whom the global capitals would be calling out for association, partnership, or help. Believe me, this does not get as much as credit in India. And let me share this. First of all, India produced its own indigenous vaccine. How many countries in the world can do it? The numbers are less than 5. Second point, after producing the vaccine, it did not only give vaccines to its own population, but it provided vaccine to 100+ nations. Yeah,
including some of the more so-called the first world economies,
rich countries. Yes. Again, and most of which, out of these 100, Indian vaccines were the first one to reach to their land, and the only vaccines to reach even till date. After 2 years of pandemic, after 1.5 years of developing the vaccines by the world in various countries, right? Third point, and it is the most point which is not being talked much about within India, which should be talked about, that there are countries who can produce the vaccines, there are countries who can get the vaccines in their airports, but there are very few countries or less countries who can get the vaccines from the airports to the arms of their people.
Yeah.
Right? It is one story to give a vaccine for free within the UN mechanism, or directly bilaterally as a gesture of goodwill, or as a commercial transaction, as a selling of the vaccine. India has done all three of it.
Right.
But once you get a vaccine, are you able to deliver that to your own
administer
population? Right? And that supply chain mechanism, that administration mechanism, all of that India has done as a cakewalk, that we are not even able to recognize the importance of.
Like the scale of what was done in India, we had that counter. I forgot what was the name. It's like COVID portal. Right? Yeah, COVID portal. Yeah. Right? So was that portal and the technological infrastructure also was provided? Do you know?
Yes, India had given the COVID portal mechanism to multiple countries. It actually organized a conference of various countries to participate, give their recommendations. We were happy to give customization changes to respective countries and give this platform for free.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's been a while, so I've forgotten about what was actually going on.
I was just this happened. I was speaking to a friend of mine who recently traveled to UK, and he was there with his partner from the US, and he's Indian national. Both of them were traveling to UK. At the immigration counter, the US guy, his partner, takes out a handwritten parchi of his vaccination proof.
Yeah.
Wherein my friend from Coimbatore takes out his phone with a QR code on it.
Yeah.
That speaks a volume.
Yeah, true. I mean, this is a huge achievement in terms of what we have done. There are still some of my concerns, when I look at the conversations that are happening in the US, right? I sometimes wonder what is the reason, that one of the things that you also have to appreciate or question the surrendering of the Indian the entire population towards without any resistance to vaccines. We are what I was just wondering about this, and probably this is a little tangential to the conversation, but I'll still bring it up. This is in terms of, if you see the conversation that's happening in the US, there is quite a bit of resistance from the citizens, the social groups. There is a huge resistance by various social groups about vaccines. Now, some of that is well founded in terms of now you see a lot of concerns that are coming up in vaccinated people, some of these concerns that are coming up about vaccines like Pfizer, where there is very less efficacy than what they actually claim. And when you see that, quite a bit of these, at that time, what was kind of counted as misinformation or conspiracy theory. Now it looks like a lot of that was probably well founded, and the claims that were made by the CDC, it was not about the masks. And we were following a lot of that, but then there was also quite a bit of policy making that was being done locally to that changing circumstances of COVID. But then when you see the American, so I feel it is more like a social, the way the country is set up. The pure libertarian sort of a mindset where hey, my body, my rules, I will decide. It's you cannot enforce a policy of vaccine or create or restrict based on vaccine about who can be employed or not. Now in India, when you see, there was literally no resistance, in terms of the only problem that we thought or we assumed that would come up was the as you said, the administrative capacities, how can we actually administer the vaccine to 1 billion people? That was actually a problem that was solved by the government, but then there was a lot of cooperation by the people instead of actually these kind of resistance that no, we will not take the vaccine. And that I think also made the job of the Indian government easy, because we were able to go into a lot of these remote areas and administer the vaccine. And I was wondering, how would it be? What would have happened if there was like a social resistance to a vaccine, like, kind of a political, making it a political statement. Because in the US, if you see, there is a democratic government, and then there is like most of the anti-vaccine is more of a right-wing conservative mindset. So what if in India, it kind of changes, like, that's where like there was an advantage from a political point of view. But what if like there is a situation where there is a social resistance to such a large vaccine movement? And we were lucky in that case. But then also kind of was wondering, what are these social, why are Indians so are we, is it something that we are used to vaccine as something that, like, a safe mechanism for, like, because we, like, as from childhood, like, we've been seeing the pulse polio campaign that has been very, very active, and it's also been, like, very efficient in India for making us free from polio. So is it that mindset where, like, we always trust our experts and we always follow the government recommendations when it comes? So just a food for thought kind of a thing. And if you had any
I think it's the answer is all of this thing combined which you spoke, so let's segregate that. Why Indian vaccination function work? I would say there are 4 points to it. All right. The very first point is that it really counters to the general fake narrative about India, that India is a land who does not believe in science and are superstitious. No, India really believes in the science. Indian population believes in medicines, all kind of medicine. It has great pride and roots in its indigenous medicine. So we had seen during the COVID, there were WhatsApp forwards of various ukalas and homemade drinks to be served on regular basis. I remember in Gujarat, the government had put out stalls on the streets distributing these ukalas and all that. And I think that really, as immunity boosters were given, and has helped, no doubt about it. Of course, it will not work as an allopathy next day, immediately, but on a longer period of time, it is good for your health. So first, that we believe in medicines and science, irrespective of where its root comes from. All right, so we believe in science. The second reason Indian vaccination worked is that there was some political gaming in the starting phase when the vaccines were not out, calling it as a BJP vaccine. And it also leads to a fact that the UP was going to the election, very close to the election and things like that. So some of the opposition party called it a BJP ka vaccine. Some of the people really questioned the regionalism within the vaccine, that why vaccine are being produced here and not there. Wherein I remember Supriya Sule's statement that Modi ji can go anywhere in the world, but finally vaccine will be produced by Maharashtra only and no other state. The real vaccine which will work. So all that happened in the starting stage. I think that is the natural flow of political life which will happen, and you cannot avoid in a democratic society. But what you see is that once the vaccine started working, or vaccine distribution started coming in, the political questions completely changed to will it work or not, to why not, right? So we had seen an active Congress campaign saying that where are mere bachcho ki vaccine kahan pe hai?
Right.
You are giving it to foreign countries.
Famously had spoken about it.
Correct, right. Which all in a way led to people believing in vaccine much more. Saying that, hey, whole political leadership are not fighting will vaccine work or not. So Western countries, America had the political debate about does vaccine work or not. Indian political leadership had a debate about where is the vaccine?
Where is my vaccine?
My vaccine?
Why am I not getting it?
Why am I not getting it? So second, that the collective unity within the Indian political framework, which really gave it a real push to it. Second reason. The third reason is the Prime Minister's personal, really focus, dedication to it. Right. And when the office of that highest order puts their whole and soul into something, that things really, really happen. We have seen that in the case of vaccination for sure. We have seen that in the case of Operation Ganga, evacuating 20,000 plus Indian students from Ukraine. And then things like that, right? So we saw that the Indian government, including or starting, I would say, from the Prime Minister's office himself, putting so much personal attention to it. traveling to he traveled, I think, to 4 various manufacturing of vaccine when the vaccines were in the process of manufacturing.
Yeah, I remember
Speeding
he
up
had
the
come
process.
even to
There were
Hyderabad.
daily press briefings by the ministry, by the vaccine approval agency, and things like that. And Tamil Nadu, like that's the third thing. So machinery putting in the place, and the fourth and most important one was the people started recommending it to their people in their circle. So it became a people's movement. Right? So I remember waking up at 5 a.m. during the starting stage, right? Wherein in my area, the vaccine slots were opened at 5 a.m. and at 5:02, like IRCTC Tatkal ticket, at 5:02, all the slots were being booked.
Yeah.
So I was like, I need to get my mother, who is a senior citizen, need to get a vaccine before me.
Thing. Yeah.
Correct? So 5 a.m., 4:30 ka alarm rakh ke, 5 baje utna, vaccine slot book karna for my mom and things like that. So we took it as a mission of our own self. So I think that 4 factors coming together really helped India in achieving this great success in vaccination.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty elaborate. I mean, in terms of, I totally agree. We had like a lot of, synergies that luckily worked out for us. One of the other things I see, was also I think this is the more from a, I don't know, we have to look at it in a negative way, but as a country, I think largely we are a very, very sort of a conformative, culture, because I think that comes from the diversity that, we kind of adjust to what comes instead of directly. So the whole aspect of rebelling against the state is still that doesn't come naturally to us, unless the bound, it's pushed too far. I don't think this is from an anthropological point of how our societies, if we've seen, this is something our good friend Mr. Manikanda and me, we keep discussing. It's that even in India, throughout the ancient times to medieval times, even various powers, when they changed, the people sort of always, their livelihood, their cultures were not totally overthrown, in terms of they still managed to get on with their lives instead of picking up weapons or picking up their fight against the state in a large sense. It did happen. It did happen in times where the injustice or the oppression was very, very high, but largely this kind of went on, the large population or the civilization had always been more rooted to their life and their land, instead of who is in power, which king is coming, which king is going, the occupations, the invasions, they mattered relatively lesser to the common population. So the whole aspect of rising up towards the state, the whole idea of inqilab that comes from the Marxist ideology of there will be revolution, that is we are far more, I think the right word is we far more supportive and reliant on the social structure that we have had, which on top of which the government actually functions, right? So there is a lot more synergy and syncretism within the people, irrespective of what kind of social governance model that we have.
See, though, so philosophically answering that question, you need to understand that Indian philosophies and Indic religions does not offer you a promised land.
Right. True. Yeah.
So the whole, what is that framework? The Abrahamic framework is there is a particular promised land, which is not where you are living right now or where you are right now. If you need to reach there, there are rule books, or there are rules, certain rules you need to follow, and there are things you do not need to do. So there are do and don'ts like rule process, and the person who will bring those rules is the messenger of God. Right. So there is a complete structure, and then on top of it, you just have this one life to do that.
Yeah.
If you miss this chance, then you are burned in hell till eternity, or till the day of judgment.
Yeah.
When we come, right? That concept is not there. What concept we have is that we are in the process of our own purification and our own perfection. So we have a concept of Ananta,
Eternal.
Adi and Ananta.
Yeah.
तो जब ये आदि अनादि है और अनंत है तो कहीं पे पहुंचने की जल्दी नहीं है. And there is nothing called a so-called the perfection, which I need to achieve, right? So when I don't have the perfection to achieve, I don't have the promised land to reach, I don't have the messenger to follow, and I don't have the rule book to abide by, it gives me a lot of flexibility and fluidity. Now, there are plus and minuses to this as well.
Right.
The plus is that you become much more accommodative and inclusive by default.
Yes.
Then you say that, hey, whatever might be the situation, rather than fighting that back, let me accommodate as far as it is conducive to my existence. As far as it is not threatening my existence, I'm completely fine with it. Because I know that the world, from the law of karma, will go through cycles.
Yeah.
So dhoop or chhav, sukh or dukh, there till the time I am in this material, like, world of samsara, punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jatare shainam, as Adi Shankaracharya says, there would be birth and death and happiness and sorrow and dhoop or chhav, and it's perfectly fine as far as it doesn't threaten my existence. So we are very accommodative, inclusive person, and from this philosophy comes the English word jugaad.
Right. So now it's an English word, is it?
Absolutely, it is there in English Oxford Dictionary. Yeah. Right. So the jugaad mentality comes from this ingrained way of living, which makes us comfortable with ruler as far as that doesn't threaten our existence.
Right.
And so that's why we have Persians coming in and being part of our society today. Also, if you go to Gujarat, there are so
Parsis,
many Parsis there, and they are the sweetest community you will ever meet.
In fact, like a lot of, if you see, I wouldn't say the elite class, but then when you look at a lot of the influential people there, like, for such a small minority to have such a large representation in the influential class, they are a magnificent community, like what they have done. How they have flourished in India. I don't think anywhere else it's happened anywhere else with the Parsi community.
Absolutely. So there's this very famous story which I'm sure everybody knows, that when they came on the shores of Gujarat, the king then of that region sent a completely full glass of milk to that community, right? Okay. And they're saying that, hey, we don't have any space because the glass was completely full with milk. What they did was they added sugar to it and mixed it, sent it back to the king, saying that we will make your society sweeter. Right. That is our promise if you allow us to deboard here.
Wow. That's a literally sweet story.
Absolutely.
Cool. So, I mean, moving on, we spoke about the United Nations and India, right? So let's talk about the Asia as a continent, like, in terms of, like, in Asia, when you look at Asia, it's a very, very multifaceted continent, right? And sometimes I personally wonder, is it even like a good idea to even consider like all these, like there is like Central Asia, there is like Russia, which is like, I don't know if it technically is a part of Asia or a whole continent in itself. And then we have like the Middle East where there is always like a perpetual conflict going on. As well as we have India and China, like, who are like the primary polarized sort of a conflict, within Asia. So, like, how is Asia contributing? Like, what is the future from an Asian perspective? Is there like as a continent, right? As a continent, is Asia represented? Because it said it is a decade of Asia, this one. But then it's as I said, like, it's so broken and so like multifaceted. And is it Asia versus the West? Because we do see Modi ji talking about the decade of the East, or like the Asian decade. Is it only China which is important and versus the rest, or is it Asia, the entire Asia versus the West? Like, what and do you see any conflict in these, like, the way these are framed? Because you have You have certain groups like the Quad, which are like there's some sort of a trans-Pacific organizations, as well as we have, like, India is in fact part of both. Like, we have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, where India, China, and Russia are present. Like, how is this whole angle or the axis, like the multipolar sort of an axis, going to play out as we go from here?
One can write a 1,000-page book on this one question. The number of questions you have combined in this one question itself. Let me break down this. Okay. Let me answer first the Asia question. Then we come to China, and then we come to India being part of multiple groupings. Right. The first is, of course, this century is of Asia, but nobody's answering me the one single question of which Asia. Is it an Asia which India thinks of? Is it an Asia which China thinks of? Or is it an Asia which Russia thinks of? Or is it an Asia of many other multi-faceted, smaller countries which thinks of?
Right.
Because remember, the Asia which is looking from a perspective of New Delhi is completely different from Beijing and completely different from Moscow.
Moscow, as well as probably countries like in the southeast, like Singapore.
Absolutely.
And like all these Indonesia and other countries. Yeah.
Yes. So we don't know which Asia is going to win. What we sure know, and that is the global cycle, that there would be a balancing act of power, prosperity from West moving towards the Asia, getting benefit to Africa on the way. All right. That is the global trend, which is definitely going to happen. Because look, there is a level to which your society can industrialize. And in West, we have reached to that optimum level almost. Right? You have almost everything in terms of what you need. So how much of consumerism you can sell to the West, there is a limit to it, and it will be on a decline.
Right.
So you need to find a new...
to say, like, those markets themselves are saturated.
And to some extent even on decline.
Right.
So you need to find a new market, because innovation has its own limitations. Right. We all know that the future is going to be AI. We all know that future is going to be IoTs and things like that. But I am hearing these jargon words in 2012 as well, and saying that future is going to be AI, future is going to be augmented reality, future is going to be all of this machine learning and all that. So to some extent, just come true, but not to the speed which I was like thinking that it would be. The way people are talking about it since 2012 to 2022, मुझे तो लगा कि कल आ जाएगा. अगले साल तो we would be flying in some with the speed of a sound or a speed of a light or something. Of course, we have crossed the speed of a sound with some tools, but not speed of light. So I think we need to understand that one, the Western markets from a consumerism point of view is on a decline or a stagnant or decline. Second, there is a limitation to which technology can give you a finest product. They can find a new technology every single day, but converting that into a consumer product which is easily accessible, affordable to a last march, there is a limitations to it. So you see that 5 साल से iPhone का गेम, iPhone का जो डिजाइन है वो नहीं चेंज हुआ है.
So they need to ceiling.
Correct. So then Apple need to find more and more Android user to come towards iPhone. And try to sell more of a service than their hardware, and then they need to sell more software, right? So point number one is there is a limitation to what you can sell to West. That's why by default the money goes towards the Asian countries and African countries in between. And I strongly believe that everything else in geopolitics follows where the money goes. Remember, there are 2 examples I keep telling to all the people who are center right in India, who talk about the great civilization India or Bharat was and want to make that. I said, look at these 2 examples. One is of an example of Iran and another is an example of Israel. Both are culture, religious oriented nation. What is the difference? One has the technology and money and another does not.
Right.
So if you want to make India, that was Bharat, back to Bharat, you cannot just talk about civilizational heroism of past. And that's why I am really interested in the conversation of Vishwaguru than Ramarajya. Because Vishwaguru is future oriented.
Okay. It's an interesting way to put it. Yeah.
With its roots to Ramarajya for sure.
Right.
With all due respect to Ramarajya, with its roots in Ramarajya, but Vishwaguru is future oriented. Is Ramarajya is a question for us to debate on.
But isn't Ramarajya more of a what do you call a state of mind, for the lack of a better word, in terms of like how we look at our own polity and our own governance framework instead of just like directly taking it from the Western democratic principles, which
So
is
what is Vishwaguru? Vishwaguru is also exactly same. If your definition of Ramarajya is state of mind and not the promised land as Abrahamic put it, then I think that is the same definition I apply for the Vishwaguru.
Right, it's true. I mean, but from a Vishwaguru point of view, you can still do it without actually establishing, like, because technically Vishwaguru is like the
mentor, the guide,
mentor of the world, right? So the mentor not necessarily has to be a good one. Like, technically, if I have to say break it down and say, okay, what is the America doing? They are also acting as a big brother who you can like loosely translate to. It's like current the power center of the global order is like in the West.
But remember the word, the meaning of guru for us is the one who breaks the darkness.
Exactly, a spiritual.
No, not spiritual, but the literal is the one who breaks the darkness.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And brings the light to your life.
So
when we sitting in India talk about we being a Vishwaguru, we are talking about bringing humanity uplifted, keeping, of course, India's interest at the center, but bringing humanity to a better stage. To coming back to your answer to question on Asia, right? So I see that there is a direct change which is going to happen towards Asia, but which Asia is something we need to reflect on. Is it Asia of China? Is it Asia of Russia? Is it Asia of India or Asia of other countries? And that leads me to a very important question to answer, and that is the China, the elephant in the room. Because the way I see it, Russia of 2 years ago is weaker than Russia of today. And Russia of tomorrow is going to be much more weaker.
Okay.
The way I see the world right now, it will be weaker, and I hope and pray that it does not become the vassal state of China. Right? So once we look at so Russia out of the picture, which are the two most geopolitical power in Asia? Who will shape the Asia history? One is India, and second is China. Now we need to understand the China model from a macro perspective. All right, and to understand China model, I give a 3M theory. Not the 3-layer mask which we need to wear to be saved from the virus came from China, but 3M theory. The very first thing is that China thinks they are some kind of a middle power. When I say middle power, they think that they are somewhere between earth and heaven. So a little bit higher than the earth. As we have the concept of Kashi, that Kashi is not on the earth, but it is on a Trishul of Lord Shiva. So a little bit higher than the whole world, right? So same China also thinks that they are a little bit higher than the whole world. If you study the geopolitical conversation of 5 years ago or 10 years ago, the geopolitical strategies used to tell you one thing, that saying that no matter West have the watch, but China has the time.
Right. Yeah, right? I've heard this.
But now that is changing. China is not ready to wait anymore. They want to achieve their higher imaginical status, which they think that they are rightfully deserving it. All right? And that's why they are doing a lot of things in the neighborhood or around the world, which they are doing. All right. And all of this thing primarily coming from the mindset or a thinking of Sultan Shi. I'm not calling him a President Shi, because he is almost like acting like a sultan. So His Highness and not His Excellency. So His Highness Shi's understanding can be divided into 3M. One is that China is a middle level power between heaven and earth. So that needs its own rightful place. The second is, for this, they are using the modern tools
Right.
of communication or information, right? So they are sponsoring a lot of academia in the West, the best of the academic schools, the best of the media, have a huge investment of Chinese stakeholders, including in India. We see that a lot of Chinese funding were there, which were exposed in recent past, and things like that, right? And how funny that is. Look, if I, as a country, make some derogatory comments about a particular country, you can expel me as a diplomat from your country. For an example, say there is a conflict between France and Pakistan, right? They had this conflict last year, right? So they reached to an almost point wherein they wanted to expel the Russian ambassador. There were so many protests outside the Russian embassy during that, some attack which happened in the name of free speech and things like that by terrorists in the France as a counter to that. You could do that. But today, all the Chinese diplomats are on your platforms. They are on your Twitter, they are on your Facebook, and they are selling their story with their bots and themselves.
Right.
Tell me a single platform on which your diplomats are there and creating the story of the outside world within the China to update the Chinese population. None.
Nothing. Yeah.
So
fact,
all
it's not
your
even
pens,
allowed legally. Yeah.
Absolutely. So all of your pens are borrowed to China currently.
Right. Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
So they are using the modern tools. Also, this is external. Internally, they are using the extreme level of monitoring on their own population to cut any dissent at its root level before it becomes up.
And and they have the tenacity to come and lecture everybody about human rights and free speech. It is as much hypocritical it sounds. It is downright. I don't know. It's so unfair. When you look at these imbalanced global order, where countries like India and for that matter going a little changing this. This is where smaller countries are also getting into their sort of a trap, right? So not just the debt trap, but the overall their web.
Correct, and that leads to my third M,
right? Okay.
And that is it's a medieval mindset. Although they may be thinking that they are a state which is above the earth, some holy place. Second, they may be having the model tool of communication and disinformation or information, whatever you want to put it. But they are still a mid-level medieval mindset, because they think that they can take the territory of anybody. And remember, we are so much focused only on the territorial integration by China of other nations, but they are doing much more than that. They are capturing your digital territories, your thinking territories, your academia, your way of thinking, the way you look at your life. All of these things are being changed, almost like capturing another country, which is very medieval mindset. So these are the 3M, which I think belongs to His Highness Xi Jinping.
Right. But do you think from a internal security point of view in India, I've heard, I've spoken to some people about these subjects, and I've always heard conflicting opinions as to how are we preparing ourselves, in these areas. I've heard, we have made some sort of noises in AI, we have to prep ourselves for this information sort of a warfare. A lot of the armed forces, people from the veterans from the armed forces have spoken about it. We have built indigenous capabilities of drones manufacturing, and we are making some advances in that. But then when you look at the overall capabilities that China has today, and then this entirely new paradigm of warfare, what we are seeing in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I think in India, there are we don't have to go deeper into it, but then just is this an active subject of discussion in India's internal security point of discussions, or internal diplomatic discussions that we have to arm ourselves in these newer types of not just warfare but the whole conflict? How do we prepare, like defense from a defensive perspective?
I think one good thing which is coming out of Russia-Ukraine war conflict, special military operation, whatever word you want to put it there, depending on which side you stand, is that for the whole world to reflect on their own internal and external security, and which are the tools available in their arsenal and how effective are they. I'm sure people in New Delhi are also reflecting on this.
Okay.
Right? So we are seeing that Russian military tools failing terribly. Right. And don't believe in any other propaganda which says that it is otherwise. No. In reality, in ground, the Russian military tools are terrible. They are failing miserably. And that is why we have this war spanning
just gone on for 9 months now.
On and on now.
Yeah.
The whole, the marketing conversation or marketing propaganda by Russia, that Russia has the very nice air power and all that. We have seen that failed terribly now.
Right.
So this conflict has really helped us to understand how we look at our internal and external security. Second thing, that China has also helped us to reflect, look at our internal security. So I'm so glad that we completely disengaged ourselves from the 5G technology provided by China or purchasing from China, and still able to roll out a 5G in less than a year and a half of a time. Yeah. And by 2023, and I think the whole India would be under 5G network. So I think all of this action which we can see is the reflection of New Delhi's awakening to the new reality, and they have definitely smelled the coffee.
Right. Cool. So coming back to one subject we just touched upon, like the smaller countries, like we've had this crisis in Sri Lanka, which unfortunately went so down the slippery slope because it was heavily tangled in the debt trap of China. Now, in spite of how Chinese this whole function of expansionist mindset by providing debt trap with countries by basically picking on their weak links for a country for example like a Pakistan or Nepal, by kind of playing sort of like an enemy of an enemy is a friend sort of those kind of moves. What is going on with smaller countries, why are they still falling into, when they see these examples of these things constantly happening, why are they still getting drawn towards this and then what's the future of these smaller countries which are falling into the Chinese sort of a debt trap?
Look, I asked this question to a friend of mine who is a diplomat of one of the African country. And when I met him over coffee recently, I asked this question, and he told me an interesting fact, which really shook me. And he told me that, look, we know that the Chinese technology is bad. We are not idiots to understand that it's a Chinese trap when they give us money for a development project. And probably we will not be able to pay them back ever. But our people are demanding these services. They want good roads, they want airports, they want good railways, they want good health facilities, educational facilities, and so on and so forth. We don't have money. Your global institutions, which you claim they will be providing us all of these things, have terribly failed, are not, or maybe not equipped enough, I would say. His words were terribly failed. And the only option we have is to look towards a lender which is ready to give us.
Right.
Correct?
And kind of kick the can down the road of what's actually going to happen later.
Absolutely. So take an example of COP26, right? COP26, the Western powers promised 100 billion in aid to African and developing countries of Asia. And how many of that dollars have come in our capitals? Less than 30%. And we are going to have at COP27. They promised that to be delivered in a year, which has not happened. Correct? So they make these big promises. They will do the conferences of democracies, invite 100 world leaders, but then democracies will work when democracy starts delivering.
Right.
That is where they are not delivering. So when you ask these African countries, he told me, when you ask me to go green, you are asking me to go Beijing. When you are asking me to go digital, you are asking me to go Beijing. I have no other option than to go Beijing.
Yeah.
So,
and also it's kind of also a political compulsion for them, because if not that party, there will be some other party which will come in place of them, who will eventually end up going there. So it's like, for them, it's like the freebie thing in India. Like, if you don't offer, somebody else will offer something. So, it's better than that. You only end up offering whatever the public are demanding, like free electricity and like, all these other things which the governments in India keep providing that for free. Right. So I think, these are probably more internal political compulsions that end up drawing them towards. One final question about global politics, and then probably we can discuss some more of your other work. Finally, we spoke about several things. We did still touch upon the UK-Russian conflict, right? We cannot talk about global politics today without actually touching on this major conflict that's going on in the world. So this is how is this whole conflict going to go over in the future? Like, is there any end in sight? We spoke about it's 9 months it's been active. How Russian firepower, so that it's not been effective. How what will this end? Will this go on till the end of this year, next year, for flow into next year? What is what's going to happen? What is a logical end to this? Like, one of the things that I was thinking from my perspective was that the midterms that are happening in the US, that they might play some role in making the American public to tell their governments to go and negotiate with Russia, which they have totally been against negotiating, and in fact they are pushing Ukraine not to negotiate with Russia. And this is something that I was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast, like Dave Smith was talking about it, that there are the PACs and several of these hawks in the US who are telling Zelensky not to negotiate. In fact, this was something that the deal initially had already worked out. So from looking at America in this conflict, do you think, and then looking at how the military-industrial complex, so that so to say, is profiting from the war, do you think there is a logical end to this, or from a geopolitical end, there is a logical end to this?
Look, what we really lack is the geopolitical empathy towards each other, which is at its bare minimum currently. Unless and until there is a geopolitical empathy towards each other, I don't see any logical end to it. But does that mean this war will go on forever? I don't think so either. What will happen at the end, in my understanding, is that Putin will look for a face saver, wherein the Russia is not completely defeated, as many in the Western countries have egoistically announced that we will make Russia a pariah state. That is not going to happen, of course not, because if it comes to that level, I don't think so Putin will shy away from using the nuke button, or threaten to use the nuke button in very active way, right? Even keeping your nuclear arsenal to any of these countries in the sea itself will trigger a lot of repercussions, correct? So using that is a far-fetched thing, but there are so many arsenal yet in the Putin's bucket that it is far away from being this pariah state which Western powers want to make it. Now the question comes to, is Western countries and Western leaders are capable enough to give him a face-saving deal? If they are able to give that, there is a logical conclusion to that. But for that to happen, there needs to be a strategic empathy towards each other. When that happens, we don't know. But that is definitely a logical end as of now. I don't see that the Ukraine completely becoming 100% Russia. I also don't see that Ukraine getting its 100% territories back as it was before.
Probably
and I also
sorry, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, and I also don't see the Western objective of making Russia a pariah state. So any of the three actors' objective getting its own 100% fulfillment is not the logical end. Everybody needs to meet somewhere in between, and which that point is something we need to explore, and future holds that answer.
Right. So probably just like one final question on this, like, have you been following Elon Musk's recommendations to end this conflict?
No, please enlighten me.
So his stand initially, he's also made some other statements yesterday and day before, which I don't exactly remember, but the larger, he ran a poll a week or 10 days ago, where he kind of proposed a solution to end this conflict, which was that Russia keeps Crimea, and then like some of the Crimea, because he said his words that it is naturally a part of Russia. And yesterday he was saying that why it's so important for them is because it's their naval base, southern naval base, and for them it's a very, very strategic area that they will never ever let go, and Russia will never be agreeing to the aspect that Crimea is a fully part of Ukraine. So that's something that he said, like, Crimea you fully give up to Ukraine. The other thing is that there will be a UN referendum in the conflicted areas, and like some other things. But then largely this was the things that he said, to which one of the diplomats, or like I think one of the ambassadors, or like I don't know who it was, but one Ukrainian official politely told him to fuck off. So then later some other things happened. It was literally there. I'm quoting that. It's like he politely, he said, like, this is my polite reply to you, F off. So that because from like the way I follow Elon Musk in terms of like what he does in terms of his work a lot, and then I feel like his heart is in the right place. He always, like, even when the conflict started, he did provide, even now, like he's providing Starlink communication network to Ukraine. They went to Pentagon and said, like, boss, like, Ukraine told us to F off, so we cannot fund this anymore. Why don't you pick up the tab? And I don't think there was a response. So finally he gave up and he said, like, to hell with this. We are going to fund this as long as it takes, because this is the right thing to do. So I feel like he has a heart in the right place. And then he also recognizes that there is we are kind of hurtling towards a nuclear third world war, which is probably the end of civilization. And for somebody who is working so hard in several of these things to save the planet, also wants to make sure that people like these don't screw it up. So that was like that's the he's been active in this conversation, although being the richest man in the world, he does have some stake to what exactly happens everywhere in the world, right? But then wanted to know if you had come across, wanted to know what's your opinion about those kind of things, because definitely there has been a lot of antagonism against what he recommended from Ukraine, as well as quite a bit of public opinion in the US. Like, they were like, dude, like, you cannot just say Crimea, like, Ukraine can never give up Crimea, even though Russia is currently occupying it. It will still be like a part of. So I don't know how.
I am not much of a tech follower, or I have not followed Elon Musk much, except watching some documentary on Netflix. But I remember a good diplomat friend of mine, very senior from France, once told me, and they said that, Ankit, the good deal is not the one wherein somebody walks out of happy from the negotiating table. The good deal is the one when both feel that they have lose out something and walks out of table.
Yeah, probably that's a much more objective assessment of what actually will happen, or should happen in terms of like the end of this conflict, that both will have to give up some of their claims, and probably, but that will actually happen when both of these people will actually come to a negotiating table, right? Right now they are not even on that table. So before we kind of wrap it up, I wanted to discuss some of these things that you are personally, as part of your work. So you are a founder of Queer Hindu Alliance, an organization, and you yourself are you are openly queer and Hindu, right? So I wanted to understand how your experience has been living in India as a openly gay person, and how our society basically tackles this, and also if you might elaborate on what does Queer Hindu Alliance do, and what are your activities and objectives, and how people might reach out to you.
Look, being gay which is falling under the larger umbrella term called as queer, in India is a mixed batch. It comes from where you're coming from, which location within the country you live in, which language you can speak, and what is your access, right? And all of these are linked to some set of privileges. And I have some of those. Of course, in my early days of discovery in the childhood, I have seen questioning myself phase, to thinking that I'm the only one in the whole world who is different, to at one point trying to commit a suicide as well, because I don't want this thing about me to be revealed to the whole world and be the reason of disgrace for my parents. To started accepting, and now being one of the active voice of the community, right? On a macro level in India, I have most of the support and a positive voices have come to me. Also, this comes from a point of view that if somebody is not accepting of queer community or accepting of me, I'm so on your face that they themselves will not talk to me, So it never reaches to a point of there is an active discrimination, at least not in front of my eyes. So when I enter the room, they already know that I'm gay. So only people who are comfortable with that fact will only talk to me. When I start working at a new job, it is written on my resume that, hey, I am a founder of so-and-so. I am in organizing Mumbai Queer Pride Parade as one of the member who organizes Mumbai Pride for so many years now. I have volunteered for Kashish International Queer Film Festival and all that. All these are active indications towards me being gay in a professional language, right? So people will only talk to me if they are comfortable with it. So I have not faced any kind of active discrimination as far as my personal life is concerned. But as an activist, I also know about many other people around the country and their journey. So when I speak, I'm not only speaking about myself, but I'm also sharing the experience of so many other queer people who unfortunately do not come from this privileged background of being confident about themselves.
Right.
And then they face discrimination. During the pandemic, unfortunately, I personally know of 7 cases of suicide happened by queer community members in last 2 years, 2.5 years. So, of course, India is progressing. We have got rid of IPC 377, which has criminalized our existence, thanks to British Raj, which is no more. Currently, there are 4 to 5 petitions filed in the various high courts of the country, which is talking about the marriage equality. Right, and hopefully it will be there, or if not through courts, then in the parliament when a uniform civil code comes. I hope the way it will be religion neutral, caste neutral, the same way it will be the gender neutral as well. But it is a mixed batch, right? Okay. There are positives and negatives. Overall, it is moving towards positivity. Now, bringing the Hindu perspective to it. So when I discovered myself, as different, I always had a question that what does my faith say about it? Does my religion accept me? And I started doing my own research, and I found that there are ample amount of references in the Vedic text and literature which talks about diverse gender identity, orientation, and expression. In my list of research, I have learned about around 67 Sanskrit terminologies, which talks about why diverse gender identity, orientation, and expressions from the various Vedic literatures, created thousands of years of time span, right? And some of them goes back to 200 BC, 300 BC, like Narada Smriti, Garga Samhita, Charaka Smriti, and things like that. So we see that there is ample amount of references to it. There are very, very minimum to no direct act of discrimination on the community. And so that gives an indication that there was some kind of space for the queer community within the Vedic civilization. Right. And that is what I try to bring in to society today. And that is why Queer Hindu Alliance. Right. Queer Hindu Alliance is a small little attempt to say that, hey, being queer is not against Indic religion, especially against Hinduism. It is not a Western influence. I don't turn gay because I'm watching Netflix, or I have gone to English medium schools, or I had access to global media from the childhood, because none of that was reality for me in my case. I studied in Gujarati medium school till my 10th grade. I did not use the internet till my 11th standard. I had no idea what internet is. And I come from a very lower middle class family. So access of the outer world was not there, and still I am out and proud gay man sitting in front of you. So I'm trying to break these myths through Queer Hindu Alliance, right? Second is that there are so many intersectionalities within the queer movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is a intersectionality of Dalit rights and queer rights.
Right.
There is an
Islamic,
intersectionality of being Muslim and queer. So there is a queer Muslim project, and different intersectionality have been talked about. But there is nobody's talking about being Hindu and queer in a country where larger population is Hindu. Right?
Yeah.
So there needs to be a voice of queer Hindus. Queer Hindu Alliance is a voice of being queer and Hindu.
Right.
Right? And third is that Queer Hindu Alliance is there to support the community in the time of a crisis. So during the pandemic, we had a Seva project wherein we did the fundraise and directly did the fund transfer to a lot of community members, irrespective of their religion, across the country. We reached out to around 162 queer individuals across the country, and we did 500,000, 2,000 rupees direct UPI transfer just for the survival. Because remember, many of the queers are working in a small scale jobs. They are leaving their villages and towns and coming to big cities to work because they are not accepted in their homes.
Right. Yeah.
And when the lockdown happened, if somebody was working, say, as a barista or working in as a sales person in D-Mart or in Big Bazaar, what will happen to them? And I know so many queer people who are like that. Their employment completely stopped, their income completely stopped. So even this monthly 2,000 rupees was a great help for them.
Right.
So Queer Hindu Alliance is there to support the community as much as possible in the need of a crisis. So these are the three reasons Queer Hindu Alliance exists.
Great. I mean, that's very, very commendable, like what you're doing. In fact, like that's the advantage, and that's the beauty of Sanatan Dharma as well, right? So we have we might have some local when you said there are references to being queer and the diversity of sexual orientation in Vedic literature. But when the sampradayas kind of take hold and there are like these rigid practices which are very, very diverse, there might be some restrictions and some resistance in some local cultures. But I think largely, is it right to say that we are a far more comfortable society and with being gay from a religious point of view than Western societies?
Nobody has sent me a message saying that I'll be stoned to death because of my orientation. That answers your question.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a beautiful way to put it. But then it's also exactly unfortunate to other cultures, where people are treated in this way when it's just like an individual identity, and then there is such resistance to people who just want to identify themselves in gay ways or various sexual orientations where there is literally a threat to life, and there are several countries where I think even today in the 21st century where it is not acceptable, and hopefully we see some progression in there. So we're doing okay in time. I just wanted to touch upon one thing in terms of you did speak about how you say when you send your resume to various companies, you're openly professing your identity as well as also your associations with these organizations. But largely when you look at Indian organizations, DEI is a much sort of touted about term, we have which comes under probably the ambit of ESG, so DEI diversity, what was the equality and inclusivity? Is that the
diversity, equity, inclusion?
Equity and inclusion, right? So this, is it directly are we aping it from the West, these policies based on how these frameworks are created by Western companies, or are we coming up with our own framework and policies how to enforce them in India based on our aspect to social diversity and our socio-political situation. What is how are Indian companies? I wanted to understand from you, because you do active work there. You consult with these companies, you speak to companies. How are Indian companies faring on these standards? And is it something that we have to have these institutionalized, or are we naturally diverse?
Okay, let me answer this question. So don't look at it from a West versus East or India versus Western countries. Look at it from a perspective that somebody started the work, and you want to continue that work.
Right.
So if somebody has already invented a wheel, why would you waste your energy and time in again reinventing the wheel rather than develop something on what is existing?
Right.
So why diversity, equity, inclusion? West has already done their work with multiple researches, which shows that by actively practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion in your businesses, it is good for your business. There is a clear monetary ROI to it. Right. So when I talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm not using the language of philanthropy. When I'm talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm not talking the language of activism or these poor people needs to be uplifted. I am talking purely from the perspective of ROI. That, hey, if you are a business working within the Indian context and you want to make profit, which I'm sure you want to do, then please practice diversity, equity, inclusion, because there is a direct link between profitability and ROI and diversity, equity, inclusion. There's a clear ROI to it. How? Of course, by practicing diversity, equity, inclusion, you can first of all attract good talent and new talent which believes in diversity, equity, inclusion. Second, you can retain those talent. And third is that you can reach out to a diverse set of market and do particular target marketing towards queer community. And let me tell you, we are filthy rich. There is a whole economical concept called as pink money, which is quite stereotype. But yes, it exists, right? So if Indian Supreme Court or Parliament makes it completely legal to marry same gender, you are going to get a lot of businesses to Indian wedding industry. Even foreigners will come and would like to get married in your palaces, right? The way others do. So there is a clear ROI to it, the financial. And third, you can. It is good for your marketing and branding. Correct. So there is a clear ROI which is already established by West in their practice by practicing that in their Western countries and producing the enough evidence which cannot be denied. Now comes the second part. So we have already answered the part why to do it. Now we are answering the question how to do it. And now that is where Indian context can be different than the Western context.
Right. Yeah.
And that is where I come in. Right. So wherein I try to help the companies to understand that how to implement the diversity, equity, inclusion in a completely Indian context. If you try to copy paste what you have done in your headquarters in New York or in Washington or in London, will not work in Chennai, Bengaluru, Mumbai, right? You need to customize that. And for that, you need the queer voices of India to help you navigate on this journey. And that is where I come in. Right? So, because Indian questions will be different, Indian context would be different, Indian market would be different. Correct? So that needs to be taken into the consideration.
That's a beautiful way, like you have summarized it in terms of how you approach it, what is the challenge here, as well as also did answer my question quite clearly in terms of what is actually happening and why is this necessary. Because some of these terms, when you listen to them, it kind of becomes like sort of lip service to some sort of let's say hiring or as you said that it helps for ROI, so we'll do it. But at the end of the day, when it is actually implemented in the right sense, that if it is actually impacting and helping the company as well as the community, it is mutually beneficial. So. Right. So because when you see some of these instances where within the current economic crisis that the whole world is going on, I've read some instances where these are the divisions which were first to be laid off, unfortunately, but which is why it still probably remains as a lip service in some of these companies. But glad that these steps are being taken up by institutions. I think there is also quite a bit of a support from even governing bodies like the UN and like other labor bodies, like, where like they push these reforms to corporations and then make them take up these issues of responsibility. So yeah, I think we have spent quite a bit of time through talking about various issues, and I hope we had a lot of more time to get your perspective on various other things that are happening in the world. So, is there something that you wanted to bring up before we close out?
Yeah, and then that is this very simple thing that within all this chaos of your regular life and around the world, please believe in the India story, which I strongly believe in. The future of Bharat, which we all dearly, dearly love, is bright. And we all collectively need to contribute towards that. So we in India do not talk about rights and duties in binary. We talk about dharma, and dharma is a beautiful combination of rights and duty both. Where in a Western conversation, it's mostly about rights, very little bit of duty. In some countries, there's both the conversation of rights and duties. But when you come to India, we talk about dharma. So stick to your dharma, which will take India ahead and then give back its glory and become the Vishwaguru.
Wow, that's fantastic way to end this conversations. Thank you, Ankit, so much for agreeing to be a part of this conversations. As I said, this is just the third episode, so hopefully we can have more such enlightening conversations where we can tackle several different kinds of topics. So thank you so much again. Hope you have a good rest of the day and the rest of the week, and my best wishes to you, to all your activities that you are part of, and hopefully if you might spell out your Twitter handle, I'll also put it in the description as well as in the video. You are Ankit Bhuptani on Twitter, right? @Ankit Bhuptani.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor and privilege, and my socials are simple everywhere. It is Citizen Ankit, CITIZEN ANKIT, Citizen Ankit. So whether it's on Instagram, it's the same on Twitter. Also, it's the same on LinkedIn /IN/Citizen Ankit, and you can reach to me.
Great. Thank you. Hope to speak to you again soon. Take care.
Thank you so much. Jai Hind.